Welcome to the Real Python Podcast. This is episode 152. Are you exploring automation of your repetitive business tasks with Python? How are you going to share these useful tools with coworkers? This week on the show, Sampo Ahokas from Robocorp is here to discuss robotic process automation and distributing these robots. Sampo is a co-founder and VP of engineering at Robocorp. We talk about using Robot Framework, an open source RPA tool, to develop bots that implement your existing Python skills. Sampo shares example projects and additional resources for new users. We discuss the typical difficulties of sharing automation tools with a team and trying to avoid the dreaded works on my machine problem. Sampo describes how their group worked to develop a Conda-based tool for creating shareable packages and environments. This episode is brought to you by REVSYS. REVSYS is the leading Python consulting firm. They help organizations of all sizes build, scale, and improve their existing Python and Django-based web applications. All right, let's get started. The Real Python Podcast is a weekly conversation about using Python in the real world. My name is Christopher Bailey, your host. Each week, we feature interviews with experts in the community and discussions about the topics, articles, and courses found at realpython.com. After the podcast, join us and learn real-world Python skills with a community of experts at realpython.com. Hey, Sampo. Thanks for coming on the show.
Hey, Christian. And thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah. You had reached out a while ago, and it took a while to kind of get things scheduled, but I'm excited to talk about it. This has been kind of an ongoing thread on the show, actually multiple threads kind of tying together this idea of kind of doing automation and scheduling tasks. We've been talking about Airflow and a couple other kinds of tools that had to do with like business processes. And this one seems to kind of tie a lot of that together. So maybe you can talk a little bit about what RPA, robotic process automation, is.
Absolutely. And I've been actually listening to your podcast.
Oh, great.
So the Airflow, it kind of touches this a little bit from a different angle. And we did look into Airflow as a base for our product early on, but ended up building our own ultimately. But that's another story. So onto the RPA. So RPA is basically using a software-based robots or bots to automate repetitive tasks, and typically this happens without altering the existing systems.
Okay.
So in a way, you often have systems that are not designed to be automated, especially not via API. So the bot can use the system exactly as a human would, and then get the things done.
Just to kind of clarify, by saying like kind of a non-modified thing, this could be like a individual worker's workstation at an office, something that's not specifically set up for, this particular task. Is that what you mean?
Yes, absolutely. A lot of the systems we see are like Oracle EBS or some old school Java applications, Windows MFC, basically any type of user interfaces.
Okay.
Where you don't have really a programmatic interface. So that's the classic RPA.
All right. So automation can sometimes be a little confusing as to, exactly what it means. What do you mean in this particular case? What are we automating?
Right. So there of course, use cases are endless. And like our CEO likes to say, in RPA, oftentimes the use cases are like snowflakes, meaning that each of them is unique. Like there's certain unique intercompany that they want to automate. But just a few examples, like concrete examples, maybe starting with a very simple one from our company. So we are a young company, around 4 years old, a small company. So we don't have all that much legacy. But in Finland, at least, companies are legally required to keep very detailed records of employees' working hours.
Okay.
And that makes a lot of sense for some companies, but in companies like ours, we basically value results, not so much like how many hours did you exactly work on a given day.
So it's not like a big time clock on the wall that people are punching in and punching out.
Exactly. So, but we are still forced to kind of keep detailed records. So one of our developers made a bot that will just log in to the HR system at the last day of given month and just submit the 7.5 hours a day for all the working days. So kind of very simple example how this can save the developer, let's say 15 to 30 minutes a month of tedious punching in the hours for each day.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's something that could be easy for someone to forget. So what sort of system would that be running on in your particular office?
So in our case, this specific bot is running on everybody's own workstation.
Okay.
So the system that's being automated is a web-based system where you just need to input the hours, and the bot is running on your own machine.
Okay, nice. I like that example. That's a pretty common one I can think of for a small office. Do you have some other common examples of like these sorts of little tasks that people want to automate?
Oh, absolutely. So what we see in the customer, maybe in the real world a bit more. So one classic example is like, let's say a company gets a new customer, and they might have 10 different systems where they need to input data about the customer, the names, addresses, that kind of thing. So you might just input the data once and kick off a bot that logs into each of these systems where this information is to go, and then just goes and types it in there with whatever means necessary for any given system.
Yeah.
Some other examples I can think of, or actually something that we very recently worked on, is, for instance, comparing two signatures. So a company has a reference signature from the customer in their records, and then they get a new document sent by the customer containing a signature. So the bot will actually compare the signatures and try to determine if these are from the same person. And this use case was built with of course, artificial intelligence making the ultimate decision. But in this example, RPA is kind of the hands of the AI. So RPA is the way to get the documents there and get the results where they need to go, etc.
The example you gave first of sort of onboarding a customer, I can kind of think of a reverse of that, how someone involved in maybe HR, the human resources part of hiring someone, and the very repetitive information that just gets filled in onto every single form. So,
Absolutely, that's a very common case.
yeah. In this particular case, maybe we can get into what the system sort of looks like that is implementing that.
Oh, you mean the RPA platform?
Yeah, kind of what's kind of underneath the hood there. It sounds like you're able to give this to a developer to create these tools, and maybe we could talk about what that sort of platform looks like as far as the tools that the person's sort of using, and then we could talk about deploying it, if you will, of sending it to these other machines to be able to run and be a bot by themselves.
Oh, absolutely. So typically, if we think of a RPA deployment, so as you said, the bot needs to be ultimately built. So the developer has to teach how the bot will do its job. And for that, we have built some open source tooling as well as some free tooling that is not completely open source. But that's the kind of the thing you see if you look our company on the GitHub. So there's a lot of libraries that you can utilize, and we base our stack entirely on Python.
Okay.
And the developer can basically use raw Python or then some add-on libraries on top of that. So it's all up to the developer to choose. Then let's say the bot is eventually built and it's working on the developer's machine. Then the question is how to deploy it.
Yeah.
So there's two main ways to deploy RPA bots. But we classify them to attended and unattended. And the attended would typically mean that it runs on person's personal computer workstation in a way that the person is always triggering it, essentially having a small application where they can press a button and say, all right, now I need you to do some work.
Okay.
And the other type of deployment is unattended, where it's more like a back office type of deployment, where the bot can run in a virtual machine or a container or basically any type of compute that that you have deployed it on. And that is managed, the operation is managed by what is in the RPA world called as an orchestrator, is kind of orchestrating the work, pushing the work to the workers, etc.
Okay. So to go back to kind of the developer story of working with this, is that where this robot framework kind of comes in? And what is that?
Yes, definitely. So Robot Framework, it's actually an open source automation framework that has been written in Python.
Okay.
So it sits on top of Python, and it provides a keyword-driven syntax for defining automations. And it's 100% open source. Its roots are in test automation. So it is actually also from Finland. And there's a guy, Peke, who made it as his master's thesis back in 2008 or something like that. So it's already a mature project.
Did you say testing
Yes.
automation? Okay, great.
Yes, so the roots are in the test automation, and then over the years, it has been adapted towards to be more suitable for any type of automation tasks.
Okay. So this one, I understand the framework kind of being built using a lot of Python. There's still quite a bit of configuration that you're doing inside of it also to kind of provide the set of tasks and things that you want it to do. In that case, you're using a configuration file, and you chose YAML for this.
Yes, our stack is based on YAML.
Okay. I don't know if you've heard recently, we've had a little kind of back and forth about YAML. Christopher Trudeau and myself, him spending a little more time on it than me. And we were talking about some of kind of the quirkiness of it sometimes. Are you using a specific version of YAML?
No, our usage is pretty basic. Ultimately, we were thinking between JSON and YAML, and YAML can have comments. So that was the deciding factor, ultimately.
Yeah, that makes a big difference, right? Yeah. Okay. It looks like there's like a couple files you set up that are YAML. There's the robot one. And what are you configuring in there? The robot.yaml.
So we have chosen a convention. There's two YAML files, and the robot YAML is essentially defining what the bot is doing.
Okay.
So it contains a list of tasks. So you can bundle multiple tasks in kind of one bot, and then you can choose that maybe in this case you want to run one or the other. And so it is just a simple definition that tells what kind of entry points you have into the bot that you are deploying there.
Okay. One of the things I really liked about the repository that you have is that if you were to search Robocorp and just type in example, mm-hmm. It'll definitely surface a lot of interesting sort of examples. And then you could also maybe even narrow it to Python if you want to see ones that are implementing lots of sort of Python specific libraries or tasks. Any other suggestions on searching for examples?
Yes, so we have whole website. It's called Robocorp portal that has we have tried to collect the like a different. First of all, like technologies, like when you want, sometimes you know that you want to integrate, let's say, Microsoft Excel, or you want to integrate Salesforce or certain type of system. And so we have some examples centered around that. And some of the other examples are more towards use case. So this is how you would build, let's say, invoice processing, where you have a certain flow of the systems, where the kind of the orchestrations come into more into the picture. So you might have, let's say, Excel file coming in, and then you split that to multiple like subtasks. You might process them in parallel and ultimately combine the results, that kind of things. So there's a huge bunch of examples we have tried to collect to make it easy to get started.
Nice. So when you kind of dig in, where does the Python part of it kind of come in as far as like it integrating with Python? Like what are some examples of how that kind of ties into the robot framework?
Yes, so the integration is pretty seamless. So robot framework is pretty thin layer on top of Python, and you can essentially implement user keywords in Python. So you just have a certain convention that you have a Python function called X, and you can invoke it from the keyword-driven syntax.
Okay.
So all in all, it's pretty seamless, and a low barrier to jump between Python and Robot Framework.
Okay. In some ways, it feels like you're scripting out and kind of jumping past the having to build out a command line interface. You're sort of defining all of it in the configuration files.
Oh, absolutely. That's one part of it. And what we feel that where one of the big value in the robot framework comes from is actually the logging. So with Python, if you want to trace what the bot is doing, you need to essentially implement it yourself. I'm sure there are some frameworks, etc. So it's not rocket science, but with robot framework, you will get by default a log that contains very detailed information on what was executed and what was the result of each keyword. And if something fails, you immediately can tell from the log that, hey, this is where we went wrong. So we feel that is one of the biggest value adds of the robot framework.
Yeah, so kind of going beyond being a solo developer, writing your own kind of individual scripts to run little jobs here and there. This might be the graduation point where you're like, okay, I do need it to do logs. I do need it to combine multiple script steps together, things like that. Is that kind of what we're talking about?
Yes, absolutely. And all these, basically it raises the abstraction level as well. So you can have a bit closer to human readable. So some companies even utilize this to, let's say, review the tasks or tests with sometimes even business people, because they are a bit closer to human readable in the sense that you can make sense out of that without understanding code. So there's a lot of benefits, but on the other hand, we are not too opinionated on that. So we have customers who are running just Python because they have the competence for that. They have maybe invested in building their own frameworks that kind of facilitate and provide a standard structure for Python. So that's also totally fine. So it's all, everything built on Python regardless.
REVSYS is a crew of Python experts. Their team of senior developers, ops people, and consultants knows what works and what doesn't. They've been where you are before, probably many times. Let them draw on their deep well of experience and guide you to smoother waters. REVSYS offers a variety of services customized to your client's needs, like code reviews, architecture design, embedding with your team to improve velocity, writing your first tests, or doing your Python and Django upgrades for you. What you don't know can hurt you. Let us make suggestions to improve your code and processes. Learn more at revsys.com/hello. One of the other potential issues that someone could run into if they aren't the developer, or even if they are the developer, is then sort of sharing this tool, and sending it to another machine. In the case of Python libraries and other things that may not be on that machine, maybe it's a brand new user and you need to set up the logging of hours, scripted or a robot. What's the way that you have for sharing those things, those sort of environments, if you will?
Sure. So this, first of all, I have to say that when we were starting the company 4 years ago, I would never believe it's this difficult. So we have invested way more time and resources into building this than I would have originally believed. But I think it has been all worth it.
Okay.
So yes, ultimately, typical challenges with the Python, is like you easily end up in a situation where it works on your machine. So maybe you have a certain version of Python that comes with your operating system. Then you try things out, you install dependencies, pip install, all very easy, convenient, nice. But soon you are at a situation where the kind of environment has kind of organically happened, and you don't really know exactly what is there.
Yeah.
And that's cool when it's on your machine, but when you need to deploy Python in production, it gets a bit more tricky. And of course, still, if you can, let's say, build a container, script the library installation and run everything in container, it's still pretty easy. But where it gets complicated in our experience when you need to ship it to somebody's desktop, and more precisely if you cannot use container technologies. And this is the case with RPA typically when you need to interact with, let's say, a Windows desktop application.
Yeah.
If you run your bot in container, it's not going to work. So you need to be able to deploy it to the end user's computer.
Yeah, it sounds like kind of combining a bunch of common issues that we've been talking about on the show of just getting things set up correctly. And it's interesting that you're leaning on Conda environments. That's not something that we've talked about a ton on the show. Is there a particular reason that you've chosen that over other potential ways of doing it?
Sure. So the Conda was chosen ultimately because we wanted to first of all deploy the Python along with our stack. So you don't need to have a Python there, and this is a big enabler for kind of systematically maintaining also the Python version. So you can have a project that you are now building with Python 3.9, and then you have another project that's using Python 3.10, whatever versions you have chosen. And if you want to reuse the same virtual machine for running these bots, then it gets tough unless you can manage the Python version in a controlled fashion. So this was ultimately the reason we went with a Conda-based solution, because Conda works very well. Conda Forge already has like Python available, so you can just say that I want this version of Python and it will just come kind of out of the box. It also works for distributing other binaries.
Yes.
Like you are not even restricted to Python. So it is, in that sense, it's more robust and more flexible.
I think it is the reason that it's as popular as it is in the data science communities, because very often they are leveraging those C libraries and other kinds of resources that you can't really necessarily do easily with pip by itself. You might need to have a little more overarching environment.
Exactly. That was our reasoning as well. And then we partnered with a company called QuantStack, and they were building an open source tool called MicroMamba, which is a tiny C++ executable, and it is like a very self-contained small executable. And yet it is able to kind of bootstrap a full Conda environment. And that's actually what we use under the hood in our stack as well.
Yeah. I actually went ahead and played with this tool, and the tool is that you have for doing this is called RCC. Like, what does that stand for?
We don't have an answer for that. So literally, we don't know in the company. I like these days. I like to use the definition given by one community member. He's not even our customer. One guy from the community, and he called it a really cool command.
All right. Yeah. So to set up RCC on the machine is really the key thing. One of the things that you have in a lot of the documentation that I was kind of going through is that in the past, if you are a Python developer, let's say, and you want to share this tool with Joe or Jane down the hall and set it up on their machine, you may have printed out 3 pages of instructions for them to follow to get it all set up. And that might be, hey, you need to install this particular version of Python, and then you need to do this and so forth. And so installing RCC in the case of on my Mac, it used Homebrew, which worked pretty well. And then you have instructions for the other ones, but it was a pretty short set of instructions. It actually went really quickly for me on my Mac. And then from there, you can just run like a single terminal command, RCC, run, or, downloading the particular package. I was pretty impressed with that.
Thank you. And I'm happy to hear it work for you.
Yeah. What it's doing that's kind of interesting is that it's sort of abstracting a lot of the choices that someone would need to make that we've been conversing about on the show about virtual environments or packaging and distribution. And I thought that was kind of intriguing. And I'm guessing it went into a lot of sort of decision making there. What were some of the hurdles that you had to kind of get through?
Yeah, sure. So as I said, this has been something we have been working on for a few years already, so it has been obviously an iterative process. Looking at the needs we basically wanted is exactly what you said, that you need to deploy the same Python program in different environments. And this also applies even if it's the same version. You might want to, like developers love like Mac or some prefer Linux.
Yeah.
So you can use any operating system you have and then deploy the same bot in Windows if that's the target environment, or Linux in the cloud. So that abstracts away that pain of dealing with the cross-platform differences.
Yeah, that's really an advanced part of what you're doing, is this idea of the developer is really just creating one solution that quote unquote works on their machine, but you guys behind the scenes are making it so that it should be able to run across all those platforms.
Yeah, exactly. And furthermore, what we have paid a lot of attention to is that we use it internally in our product as a Swiss Army knife under the hood in all the cases. So whenever the developer runs a certain bot with RCC on their machines, it's going to be run exactly the same way when it's deployed to production. And whether it's an assistant like a end user desktop, or whether it's a back office type of bot, is always going to go through the exact same flow using RCC. And with this, we want to make it as easy as possible and have the developer be as confident as possible that it works on my machine. It's most likely going to work on the product.
Yeah.
Of course, that's not always the case, but that's what we aim for.
Have you had examples in your own life of the it works on your machine kind of thing?
Oh, well, plenty. So me a developer who has not, and I mean, of course, but it's more prevalent in my experience. I have it mostly with Python and Node to some extent, where it's very easy to pull in the third-party dependencies, and then you end up kind of a situation where you don't know what you have.
Yeah. Part of what is happening that I thought was intriguing too was that I don't know if that's part of the Conda environments, but it is definitely locking the dependencies. Is that something that you got to choose, or is that something that's sort of built into like what QuantStack kind of built?
Yeah, we have co-developed it, and some of it is still in our stack. And this is one of the things that is pretty nasty if you don't lock the dependency versions. You might deploy a bot in production, it runs nicely for a month, and then some third-party library in the chain changes and things break. So we try to provide it as easy as possible to also pin down the dependencies, and once you deploy to production, we try to guarantee that you get the exact same versions of the libraries.
Okay. There are a couple different ways that you might script this thing to sort of run. What would it look like typically for that end user once it's been installed on their machine to get this to run? I think you mentioned maybe they could just click a button, but I'm guessing that might involve having to add a couple extra things as opposed to maybe typing a terminal command.
Sure. So there's kind of maybe we can first talk about the generic case. If you just like to use our open source offering, let's say RCC tooling.
Okay.
So then it is a command line program. You could just script it, add a batch script on the desktop or something like that. So that is completely free and open. Then if you go into what we offer as a product, the users would typically not deal with RCC directly. So we offer a few layers of abstraction on top of it. And talking about these two classic cases, one, the case where you want to deploy it on your personal desktop. For that, we have an application called Robocorp Assistant. So you would install that assistant on each of the machines where you want to run it. And then that gets linked to our cloud platform, which we call control room. And ultimately, what the control room is doing in case of the assistant, it lets the operator of the RPA operation to kind of define that what version of the bot is deployed. And ultimately, our product will be like a chain to deliver the exact version of the bot and the configuration to the machine. So IT needs to install the application, and then the user goes through a very simple linking sequence, and then the operation can be managed in a centralized fashion.
Okay. Does that include running the RPA on their own machine, or could it also be running as like a cloud hosted thing? Is that part of it too?
Absolutely. So that is the other type of deployment, what we call unattended. And for that deployment, we do have an application called Robocorp Worker that is a kind of does the same things, but the main difference is there that the worker essentially connects the machine to be part of the digital workforce in a sense that the cloud platform can and provision work to these machines.
Okay.
So they are kind of there sitting, waiting for some job to be dispatched to them. Whereas in the assistant case, it's always the end user who is triggering it. But the cloud platform can the jobs can be triggered by an API call or maybe an inbound email, a schedule, that kind of thing. So it offers much more flexibilities in how the bots are started.
Okay. So like it could be staring at a directory waiting for something to land in there. And
Absolutely.
okay. Well, I think that gets us pretty deep into the platform and sharing it and configuring it. One of the things that you've decided to do here is make this open source. And there was like an entire page on your website that talks about advantages. Why do you think there are advantages for your company to have this be an open source tool?
Mm-hmm. So our company has all the founders are developers.
Okay.
So we kind of have the developer mindset, and developers they also love open source.
Yeah.
We also think that it makes sense in many ways. So open source has been transforming many industries, and in our vision, it's time for it to do that for the RPA industry. Of course, for the customer benefits, the way we see it is, first of all, they have full control of the bot. So they are not, even if we would go away, they still have the bot, they still have the full stack used to implement it. So it kind of gives them insurance that nobody is going to take that away, and nobody is going to just magically make it much more expensive to run, etc. So they can assume ownership of their bots. It also allows them to audit the bots down to the last line of code, and that is often very desired in regulated industries where the bot may deal with some sensitive data that needs to be right.
There's nothing hiding
Exactly
in a particular folders or whatever. Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Yeah, and on top of that, maybe some OPOs benefits to mention that is that being able to leverage all the development tooling that is being built in the world, which is also a lot of it is open source, but like a version control, code reviews. So just being able to plug into the existing infrastructure there and not having to build all that in our product is also a relief in many ways.
Okay, so this virtuous circle there.
Mm-hmm.
Nice. If someone was interested in getting more involved with Robot Framework or RCC or some of these other projects that you have that are in open source, how could they get involved?
So Robot Framework is a bit different. It is governed by a foundation, and it is a mature project. And at the core, the beauty of it is pretty simple at its core. So you would typically not need to contribute to the core framework itself. But what it has going on for it is a huge thriving library ecosystem. So, and this is where many people end up starting their journey. Is maybe they want to integrate with a certain system, but it doesn't have a robot framework library available. So they might start by building a library and publishing it as open source. And so that's the most common way to start contributing there. On our tooling specifically, we also maintain the RCC. Then we have a library called RPA framework, which is essentially a collection of libraries for robot framework that are tailored for typical RPA use cases. And we, of course, welcome contributions. We have had some already, but it's all out there. Development is visible on the GitHub, and anybody is welcome to try it out and report issues or even contribute code.
Okay. And if people are interested in sort of checking out sort of the community conversations on that stuff, GitHub is a great place to kind of see, what's going on as far as the current state of things. But are there other sort of community platforms that you're using also?
Oh, yes. We have a Slack community that is like, I believe, 12,000 registered members. So it's already quite big and active. And you can get yourself invited by essentially signing up for our product and checking a box. Then, funnily enough, it is also a bot that will invite you to the Slack community.
There you go, yeah.
And the bot is open source also on our website.
This week, I want to shine a spotlight on another Real Python video course. If you work with files, whether it's creating, organizing, or transmitting them across the internet, and you'd like Python to help manage some of these tasks, then this course is for you. It's titled Manipulating Zip Files with Python. The course is based on a Real Python tutorial by Leodanis Pozo Ramos. And in the video course, Darren Jones shows you how to read, write, and extract files from zip files with Python's zip file. Read metadata about the content of zip files. How to use zip file to manipulate member files in existing zip files. And you'll create new zip files to archive and compress existing files. If you commonly deal with zip files, then this knowledge will help to streamline your workflow and help you process your files much more confidently with Python. Real Python video courses are broken into easily consumable sections, and where needed, include code examples for the techniques shown. All courses have a transcript, including closed captions. Check out the video course. You can find a link in the show notes, or you can find it using the enhanced search tool on realpython.com. I think it's an interesting platform. Like it's kind of this thing that, I already talked about the idea of an individual developer sitting there and working with like a singular script and then figuring out like, okay, well, how can I run it? And then again, having to roll your own, like, how do I share it kind of thing. So this is acting a bit like a set of tools to glue it all together, and then a consistency, which I think is really interesting to it. What else do you think are advantages to the platform?
You nailed it with this description, because just today I was in a customer call or potential customer, and they were saying that we have been using Python to build automation, and they love it. The automation perform well, they are reliable, developers love it, but what they are struggling with is they have 200 automations deployed and they have zero visibility. Well, they do, of course they do have some, but you can easily imagine how you end up deploying a Python automation,
Right.
Put it to run on some virtual machine or Lambda, whatever you want to use. But you don't really have the centralized governance and visibility on what the bots are doing and what kind of business value are they creating, or even like the technical operations of it. So that is where we believe that our product can add a lot of value, especially the control room, is to manage the operation.
Yeah, that makes sense. If someone wanted to, we talked about using RCC to move the particular RPAs to like a Windows machine from a Mac or to like a Linux machine. Is that also, I didn't really see much on it, but like, I'm guessing you could get it to run in like a container environment or something like that. Also, if you wanted to, like host it somewhere.
Yes, definitely. Our easiest solution is we do offer containers that are hosted by us.
Sure.
So in that case, only thing you need to do is push the bot to the platform and click run, essentially. We have implemented it in a way that each of the run gets their fresh container. We will provision the environment there, the bot will do its thing, and then the container will die along with all the data that you don't explicitly push out. So this is probably half of our volume is coming from this type of automation. So this is very easy to get started with, and it works extremely well for automating systems that are available on the internet, where you can, run a container on the internet and the system is available.
Yeah.
But where it falls short, of course, is if the system is a Windows application or it is hosted somewhere in your internal network. So in those cases, you always need to deploy what we call a self-hosted worker, where you control the infrastructure.
Yeah, well, that's been, again, kind of going back to the regulations and things like that. I've worked in a couple of those industries where you're really locked down.
Yes.
And yeah, okay. So yeah, it's nice that, again, it being open source, that I guess you could maybe have people look through it and get approval and move things forward. I'm a little interested, like how you got interested in this field, like what made you interested in automation and getting involved of it now that you're the VP of engineering.
To be frank, in my case, it was the founding team. So I was not in general, I have to admit, I'm not the visionary here who is telling where we need to go. I'm all about getting things done once we have a clear goal. But all the credit for kind of getting the company started is our founder, CEO, Antti, who had been actually doing, RPA, or in the company he was working in, they were doing RPA with the current market leading tools like UiPath, Blue Prism, those tools. And he kind of realized that it's mostly developers building the bots, but those tools are not developer tools.
Yeah.
And developers are not exactly loving the tools. And I'm not discrediting the tools, but it's just the way they are built. So they are essentially user interface based, etc. So Antti's vision was that we need to change this. We want to offer an alternative way to do RPA that is developer friendly, built on the developer ecosystem. And other thing he wanted to change in the status quo was that we want to build it cloud native. So the current generation market leaders are still mostly on-prem. They have added, of course, cloud-based offering, but we build it from the ground up to be a cloud-native multi-tenant solution.
So they were historically having a server or some other kind of thing on the premises of a particular place, and everything was installed there.
Yes, exactly. And of course, there's nothing wrong with that. And truth be told, whenever many of the big companies were starting, it was not possible to do cloud native the way it is today. So it's just that the technology has evolved very rapidly into a direction where this is the norm these days.
Yeah. As far as the tooling part, I noticed you guys are showing off VSCode quite a bit in it, and sort of a integration there as far as code completion and so forth. What was some of the decisioning there as far as showing off VSCode as a tool?
Yeah, this was also another interesting story. So, of course, we wanted to leverage something that was out there, and our initial developer tool was actually based on Jupyter Lab.
Oh, okay.
And that was also like Python, all that, but it didn't ultimately work out. It was just way too big, too complex. Maybe we didn't manage to do it right. I don't know, but we had a lot of challenges with that. And then we started to experiment with other tools, and then VSCode, it got a lot of traction. So the users loved it, because of course developers love it, and ultimately it ended up being our primary tool. But we still think that there is demand for something that is a bit easier and lowers the barrier of entry. So we have also recently launched like an early version of a tool called Automation Studio that is kind of bringing the more like drag and drop and more easy to approach tool, which kind of solves the problem that when you open the tool and you have an empty editor window, that is really tough to get started from, even if you have an example.
Yeah.
So we are trying to bridge the gap here with Automation Studio, but VSCode is still the primary tool that essentially allows you to do anything.
So that tool would look more like potentially like, dragging puzzle pieces together to.
Yes,
okay.
Exactly. That's what the Automation Studio is about.
Okay, cool. One thing that have a few links to and kind of seems like maybe that you're very interested in is this intelligent document processing. Tell me a little bit about IDP and how this might integrate with that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it's very common in the real world use cases we see. So almost every day we are talking with customers. Right now, we don't have anything bundled in our product. So our strategy has been in a way to just make it easy to integrate with the best of breed IDP solution that are on the market, because they often depend on the use case. So some IDP solutions good for invoices, something else may be better for if it's, let's say, know your customer use case where you need to look at identity documentation, that kind of things. So we usually try to support our customers in bridging together a mix of technologies that work best for them. But IDP is definitely something that we see out there all the time.
Yeah, I guess that signature comparison would be an example of that. Or
yes,
yeah, okay,
that too. Yes.
Well, Sampo, I have these questions I like to ask everybody. The first one is, what's something you're excited about in the world of Python that could be like an event that's coming up, book, package, editor, what have you?
Yeah, this probably sounds even boring, but for me right now, it's the sudden raise in popularity of the artificial intelligence. So everything that's going on there started by ChatGPT. So it's just fascinating to watch like the revolution, and it's just unbelievable what it is capable of. And I have to admit myself, I was like half a year ago, I was still a bit hesitant. Like, is this AI thing really something that you can deploy and put into good use? But today I don't have any doubt of it, and it is here to stay. So my current what I'm like learning and looking into is trying to understand it more, because I wasn't too deep into space earlier, but now I realize that it is something that is absolutely mandatory these days.
Yeah. Are there any particular resources that you've come across that were really informative or kind of piqued your interest?
We have been looking at things like LangChain. Also, we are running a pilot with a fellow startup who is basically providing a chatbot that is able to answer questions and answer them based on our documentation. So we have trained it on our materials and running it on our Slack community, actually. So for me, it's all about like understanding how this technology now enables solving some real world problems.
Yeah. Yeah. As somebody who's kind of working in the media world, I've used it, at least the open AI sort of portal version of it, to like, okay, write me a summary of this thing, which is really kind of amazing. It not having to interject an opinion or anything like that, but just to save time to do something like that. It's really powerful.
Exactly.
This doesn't have to be Python or programming specific, but what's something that you want to learn next?
I guess I already answered also that. So there's always let's say building a startup is, I think that I have learned so much during the last 4 years we have been going on about it. So it's constant learning, but now I'm putting the conscious learning efforts are now going towards the AI development.
Awesome. So how can people follow along with the project or follow what you do online?
So personally, I am not very active on the typical online channels, but as a company, of course, we try to make a lot of noise about all things automation, Python, and robot framework. So we do have, as mentioned, a very active developer Slack community that anybody can join. And of course, we do have our GitHub, LinkedIn, Twitter, the usual things.
Okay, great. I'll make sure that we include links for all that stuff there.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Thanks so much for coming on the show. It's been really fantastic to talk to you.
Likewise. Thank you.
Remember, every developer needs to lean on a more experienced team member from time to time. REVSYS and their team of Python experts at REVSYS.com can be that team member for you. I want to thank Sampo Ahokas for coming on the show this week. And I want to thank you for listening to the Real Python podcast. Make sure that you click that follow button in your podcast player And if you see a subscribe button somewhere, remember that the Real Python podcast is free. If you like the show, please leave us a review. You can find show notes with links to all the topics we spoke about inside your podcast player or at realpython.com/podcast. And while you're there, you can leave us a question or a topic idea. I've been your host, Christopher Bailey, and look forward to talking to you soon.